Tonight, a fugitive unmasked. The identity of a man arrested in hospital in Glasgow is confirmed as Nicholas Rossi, who faked his own death and is wanted in the United States on rape charges.
People are capable of doing things that we would not normally think of doing. And he did that, deceiving all of us.
Also making the headlines, businesses brace themselves for a move back into recession. The Chancellor warns of eye-watering decisions on the economy.
In sport, Ange Postecoglou questions if VAR is ready to be used after teething problems with the technology.
And a snake in the grass or a gem in the jungle? How is former Health Minister Matt Hancock performing in Oz? I'm Emma Cameron in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6.
Good evening. The Chancellor is warning he will be making eye-watering decisions as the economy appears to be heading into recession. The latest figures show the economy shrank in the 3 months to September.
That means companies are not performing as well, which could lead to higher unemployment and spending cuts. Our political correspondent Ewan Petrie reports.
As the UK economy heads for recession, painful cuts to public spending as well as tax rises lie ahead. This foam and plastics manufacturer is feeling the impact of rising costs and supply issues.
The electric and the gas for heating and making the products has really increased fourfold, fivefold over the last 12 months. And that really has an impact on what we can spend for investment purposes and on our staff going forward.
The challenges look set to increase. Between July and September, the UK economy shrank by 0.2%. In September alone, it fell by 0.6%, partly due to the bank holiday for the Queen's funeral. If, as predicted, the economy also shrinks in the final 3 months of this year, it would enter a recession forecast to last around 2 years.
It's likely to mean if the economy is contracting that maybe some businesses are likely to get into some difficulty. It might mean that they start to shed jobs, which might mean that unemployment starts to go up. So it just means that probably wider economic conditions aren't very good, and I think we can all feel that.
A drop in consumer spending means the UK is on course for the quickest return to recession since 1975. It's the only economy among G7 countries which is currently shrinking.
Well, according to the International Monetary Fund, around a third of the world's economy is in recession this year or will be in recession next year. And that is principally, but not entirely, because of very high global energy prices. We are not immune to that in the UK, and what we need is a plan that shows how we're going to get through this difficult period. If it is a recession, how we make it shallower and quicker.
Inside the Treasury, they're applying the final touches to that plan. What the Chancellor has to say in next week's statements will go a long way to determining how challenging the coming months and years will be for households and businesses. Ewan Petrie, STV News.
The nation fell silent this morning to remember those who lost their lives in conflict. A 2-minute silence was held across the country to mark Armistice Day, with the public also being urged to remember the current war in Ukraine.
But some veterans were left disappointed after a ceremony in Edinburgh was called off and relocated at the last minute because of high winds. Here's Laura Alderman.
For 2 minutes, the nation was still and silent. Every year, on the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, we remember the war dead. Poignant services were held across the country to mark Armistice Day, the anniversary of the end of the First World War. At Erskine Care Home in Bishopton, the community and veterans gathered together for their first full service since COVID.
You've got to remember them. no matter what. If it wasn't for them, there's a lot that we've got to be thankful for. It was impressive, there's no doubt about it.
I really liked coming and putting the crosses down, and then I liked when we had the 2-minute silence.
In the hubbub of Glasgow Central Station, a sombre service was held. But in Edinburgh, things didn't go to plan. A service was due to take place here in the Garden of Remembrance in Edinburgh, but due to high winds in the capital today, the council was forced to close the gardens and the ceremony was cancelled.
We're disappointed, we didn't know that it had been shifted.
Sad, but we got the crowds just the same, but I thought they would have had a piper.
I think everybody who's in the military always have plan B, yeah.
But one veteran wouldn't take no for an answer.
I broke through the barrier. I went and I stood and I paid my respects, and that's it.
Further tributes will be paid on Remembrance Sunday. But with every year that passes, fewer and fewer World War veterans remain with us, making it even more important to preserve their stories and reflect on their sacrifice. Laura Alderman, STV News.
It began with the arrest of a man in a Glasgow COVID ward. Interpol said he was Nicholas Rossi, who faked his death to evade rape charges in the United States. He said he was Arthur Knight, a victim of mistaken identity, an orphan from Ireland. Over the last 11 months, there have been multiple court appearances, hospital readmissions, further arrests and continual denials.
Today, a sheriff rejected his evidence as implausible and fanciful after hearing his tattoos and fingerprints matched those of the man wanted in Utah. It's a story which has gripped both sides of the Atlantic. Our chief reporter Sharon Frew has been following the case throughout and was in court today.
He may have hidden his face leaving court, but now he's been unmasked as a missing fugitive. The man with at least 16 different aliases has finally had his identity confirmed by a Scottish court.
By the evidence of fingerprint, photographic and tattoo evidence taken together, supported by the evidence of changes of name, that Mr. Knight is indeed Nicholas Rossi, the person sought for extradition by the United States.
These are some of the photographs of Nicholas Rossi included on an Interpol red notice that was shown to nurses and police officers in Glasgow. They identified Rossi, who is wanted in Utah, last December. At the time, he was a COVID patient in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. This week, the 35-year-old claimed he had been tattooed while in a coma in the hospital, and that an NHS employee had taken his fingerprints and passed them on to the American authorities. This evidence was rejected by the sheriff as implausible and fanciful. Rossi has always insisted he was an Irish orphan. Last March, in an interview with STV News, he repeated his claim that this was a case of mistaken identity.
So to be clear, have you ever been known by any other name? You have been known as...
Nicholas Brown and Arthur Knight.
Not Nicholas Rossi?
That is not my name. I have never been known by that name.
Nicholas Alaverdian?
Those names are not me. And that is the fact.
There was delay after delay in these extradition proceedings, with Rossi sacking his lawyers many times. It's a tactic he's used before, according to a woman he attacked when she was a young student in Ohio in 2008. He was later convicted and placed on a sex offenders register.
In my case, he appealed, he was sentenced in 2008. I don't think that his appeals and he actually started doing anything with it until maybe 2012, 2013, because he's just doesn't want to face the music. He doesn't want to face the consequences for what he does. He doesn't want to admit he's a predator. So I think the same thing is going to happen here. Nick is going to do everything he can to delay coming back here.
NBC 10 News starts.
This is how the news was broken in Rhode Island earlier.
STV News reporting that a sheriff in Edinburgh confirms that
here he is known by his birth name, Nicholas Alaverdian. To many, he was a familiar face at the State House, where he tried to gain a reputation as a campaigner for child welfare reforms. In February 2020, they were led to believe he had died, with many being deceived into paying tribute.
I could see him through the mask, but I didn't really want to say until they actually confirmed it, you know. There's ways of confirming all of this, and they've done it in your country. Fingerprints don't lie. And it was him. And I'm disappointed with myself. I'm disappointed with him, because I knew the individual.
An over-the-top obituary raised suspicions. They grew when memorial services were cancelled by police, who believed the death was a hoax. The priest here said he was given detailed notes on what to say and that the music requested was quite grandiose, not what is traditionally played at a memorial mass. The priest also later learned that a Facebook page had been set up to invite hundreds of people, including former and current elected officials.
Someone got in touch with me that claimed to be his wife and wanted me to give a eulogy. She said, well, I've been married to him for 15 years. I said, well, I never heard of you. How do you get away with faking your death like that, going to another country? How do you get a new identity? It's not the same Nick I remember.
Son, that's definitely Nicky.
For his stepdad, his identity was never in any doubt.
So very manipulative. He's just bad news. It's just a nightmare. He ruined his life. It's sad, and he's a smart guy. When are they going to extradite him? Why does it take so long?
Nicholas Rossi is wanted by authorities in Utah, who allege he raped a 21-year-old in 2008. Prosecutors have made 2 additional extradition requests, one relating to an allegation of rape in Salt Lake City and another to an allegation of sexual assault. He will remain in custody until the next extradition hearing in January.
Hope he comes back to Utah in shackles. He's a very dangerous kid. You wouldn't know, but he has a dangerous mind.
Rossi has also been accused of another rape in 2017 by a woman in Essex. This evening, the police force there say they're liaising with Scottish authorities to arrange to speak to the man, whose identity we now know. Sharon Frew, STV News, Edinburgh Sheriff Court.
Well, this story has many twists and turns. And Sharon, you met this man. You travelled to the United States, as we've seen, to meet people who knew him. What did you make of him?
Well, he clearly is a very complex character. When I visited Rhode Island, the one word that kept coming up most commonly for people who knew him both as Nicholas Rossi and Aliverdian was persistent. He was relentless in pursuing what he wanted. Now, following his arrest in Glasgow, what was very unusual about this case is that he didn't appear to shy away from the media. In fact, he went out of his way to approach other journalists, including myself, both here in Scotland and in the United States, to peddle this story that he was Arthur Knight. And this would involve repeated phone calls, messages, emails and countless court appearances. He sacked his lawyers over and over again. He repeatedly, as you heard, tried to get admitted to hospital before court dates to avoid hearings, and all this attracted publicity which at the start he appeared to revel in. Now, to the outside world, this man in an oxygen mask, in a wheelchair with a very strange accent may appear a somewhat comical figure, but what we cannot forget here is that he is a registered sex offender and is accused of extremely serious allegations. 2 rapes and a sexual assault in Utah and another alleged rape in Essex.
So what happens next?
Well, this is just the start of a very long process. Now that identity has been established, we progress to the full hearing to establish whether he should be sent back to the United States. Now that hearing, the full hearing, will begin in March and he will remain in custody until then. Now, Utah prosecutors who sought this extradition, they say they are patiently waiting for this process to go through, adding that they are very appreciative of the efforts of investigators. We are now in a waiting game.
Sharon, thank you. In other news, an independent inquiry has concluded that an incident involving an asylum seeker at a Glasgow hotel was an avoidable tragedy. Baroness Helena Kennedy, KC, said that moving asylum seekers out of flats into hotels during the pandemic was poorly planned and caused a striking deterioration to mental health. A report calls for a statutory inquiry into the event at the Park Inn in June 2020, when a man was shot dead by police after stabbing 6 people.
COVID infections have fallen in Scotland. 1 in 50 people are testing positive for the virus. That's down from 1 in 35 the week before. Scotland now has the lowest prevalence of COVID of all 4 UK nations. An Italian tourist accused of killing 5 people by dangerous driving in a crash in Murray has told a High Court jury he did not fall asleep at the wheel and said he had not felt tired. Alfredo Cicola denies the charge. This afternoon, the prosecutor urged the jury to convict him over the collision which happened in 2018. Here's our senior reporter, Gordon Cray.
Advocate Depute Derek Nelson is prosecuting this case. Today he spoke to jurors, urging them to convict Alfredo Cicola of causing death by dangerous driving. He told them, layer by layer, the evidence builds up until you will be left with the inescapable conclusion that he is guilty of this crime. The court has heard how the crash happened on the A96 near Keith, as the minibus driven by Mr. Cicola collided head-on with another car. He'd been taking his family and 2 friends on a tour of Scotland. They were headed for Inverness on a day that had seen them travel from Edinburgh before spending several hours at Glamis Castle and having dinner in Stonehaven. Earlier, Alfredo Cicola gave evidence in his defence. He said the A96 road wasn't as he'd expected it to be and said he found it very dangerous. He added he'd been very cautious, driving slowly and paying attention. Asked if he'd intended to still be in the middle of the country nearing midnight, he said no. He insisted that he hadn't fallen asleep, but said he had not been tired. He claimed that just before the crash he'd looked briefly in the rear-view mirror and was then disorientated by headlights coming towards him and didn't have any time to brake. Mr. Ciocola's 4-year-old son died in the crash, as did one of his passengers, Francis Saliba, and 3 people in the other car, Edward Reid, Audrey Appleby and Evelyn Colley. The 50-year-old told the court today news of those deaths was the most terrible thing you can hear. Their pain and the pain of their families is also my pain, he said. He denies causing death by dangerous driving. The defence makes its closing speech on Monday before the jury is expected to retire and consider its verdict. Gordon Cray, STV News, at the High Court in Edinburgh.
Sam Hewen, Travis and Ian Rankin are just some of the famous names who've donated more than 100 items to raise money for a Glasgow primary school. All the proceeds from the silent auction will go towards helping the pupils at Garnet Bank. Caitlin Hutchinson went to have a look at what you could get your hands on.
It started with 2 parents and an idea, a star-studded virtual auction with donations from the very best of Scottish talent. The goal, to raise upwards of £10,000 to help make sure pupils at this school get the fully rounded education they deserve.
They reached out through their communities and into the wider Glasgow community and managed to get all of these donations, which has just been fantastic.
I feel really grateful for all the parents that donated for us. They're very kind. The money is fantastic, but it's not all about the money. There's like a big wave of kindness. Everyone's giving.
This primary school in the heart of Glasgow has a high percentage of children living below the poverty line in need of additional support and supplies.
After the years that we've just been through, lots of our children have had an incredibly difficult time. They've not been able to get out. They've maybe been in flats in the city and, not been able to play in a garden. And I'm so keen that we try and make up for that over the next while and give them every opportunity we possibly can.
Stars of the arts, stage and screen have all lent their support to this inner city primary school. So, if you fancy a day on the flumes at the time capsule with comedian Frankie Boyle, virtual cocktails with actor Alan Cumming, or you're a budding musician, there really is something for everyone. The auction site, which reads like a who's who of the country's best talent, is open until 6 p.m. tomorrow. So you have until then to get bidding. Caitlin Hutchison, STV News.
Very cute. Now here's Ronnie. Maybe. Nah, you're okay.
Get your fill of the action. STV Sports, sponsored by Papa John's Pizza.
Good evening. If VAR is not ready, don't start using it, the words of Ange Postecoglou after a number of early issues with the technology. Today, the SFA confirmed there was a camera problem during a VAR check in Celtic's game with Motherwell, but they insist the correct decision was made. Meanwhile, the injuries continue to pile up at Rangers, with Giovanni van Bronckhorst admitting he's looking forward to the World Cup break. When Jota put the ball in the net for Celtic on Wednesday night, VAR ruled it offside. But this was the broadcast image used to illustrate the decision, from the camera on the edge of the Celtic box, making it look far from conclusive. Today, the SFA admitted the camera at the other end of the pitch did not capture an appropriate view of the incident, but the decision was the right one. The Celtic manager, however, is questioning why there's so many early issues.
It's why I was uncomfortable with the fanfare when we introduced it. Everyone was, it was the talk of the town. VAR's coming as if it's something that, is brand new. Australia, which, everyone seems to think is a backwater, had VAR 4 years ago. It's not a new thing. We've made this big fanfare and now we're saying, expect teething problems. I don't know why there would be teething problems for something that's been around for 4 years, 5 years. I don't even know how long it's been around. If we're not ready, don't start with it. Just wait till we're ready.
No fresh injury concerns for Celtic as they welcome Ross County to Parkhead. The same, however, can't be said for Rangers. Antonio Cholak, the latest to be sidelined for Giovanni van Bronckhorst's side, and will miss tomorrow's match against St Mirren. The Ibrox boss admits his squad is now down to the bare bones.
We need a break. My players need a break. Just look at my squad and how many players we have not available. And then I think it's normal that you are, waiting for the break and time to recover and refresh.
St Mirren have the chance to beat both sides of the Old Firm in the same season for the first time in over 30 years. Stephen Robinson is hoping his players can take courage from their 2-0 win over Celtic in September.
The bravery comes from the players, not the manager, and they showed tons of it against Celtic. We go into this game no differently. We're well aware of Rangers' threats. They've got players that can win games in a moment. We have to be aware of that, but also not fearful.
Kilmarnock boss Derek McInnes is calling on his players to come out fighting against Hibs this weekend after they fell to the bottom of the Premiership. The 4-0 defeat to Dundee United was Kelly's third in a row.
Nobody likes being where we are, and it's up to us to, as I said on Wednesday night, just to come out kicking and fighting and showing that we're a good enough team to win games in the Premier League as we're shown. So looking forward to the game.
And Motherwell manager Stevie Hamill has asked his injury-hit squad for one final push as they travel to St Johnstone. Scotland midfielder Sam Kerr says bringing the next generation of women's football stars into their Spanish training camp has brought a fresh dynamic to the squad. Head coach Pedro Martinez Losa will field an under-23 side against Panama tomorrow, with a handful of new faces set to feature. A full international team will then face Venezuela on Monday.
When you bring in new people, obviously it's a fresh dynamic alone, and the fact that Pedro has made this a hybrid camp and brought in quite a lot of under-23s has been great, and it gives a lot of opportunity for younger players to come up and to see what's expected of them, to know the standard, the process, what we want to achieve in the future.
Finally, rugby, and after being left out of the original squad, Finn Russell will now start for Scotland on Sunday against New Zealand. Gregor Townsend says he's been convinced by Russell's form and hopes he can lead the attack to a first ever win over the All Blacks. Meanwhile, one Scottish-born Kiwi is looking forward to his first outing at Murrayfield, as Ivana Holland can now explain.
3 weeks ago, Finn Russell wasn't in good enough form to be selected for Scotland. Having joined up with the squad on Tuesday, he's now starting against the All Blacks.
Look, I think I mentioned it when we announced the squad a few weeks ago. He was playing better those 2 weeks before we announced the squad, and often you're making these decisions based on the form during the season, perhaps the form at the end of last season, but you're comparing it to other players who are in form. And at the time we had Blair Kinghorn, who had played in the summer tour for us, had been playing well with Edinburgh, and also Adam Hastings, who was outstanding for Gloucester this season.
One of the interesting selections for the All Blacks is at scrum half. Finlay Christie was born and raised in the Borders before his family up and left for New Zealand when he was just 8 years old. But he says to play at Murrayfield has always been on the bucket list, and there'll be a special outing for his family.
They're real stoked, so they'll be along at the game, and yeah, they'll be happy.
And what jersey?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they'll be happy either way, won't they? So win-win for them.
Ian Foster was brief about the Kiwi Scottish Exchange programme.
Well, we got one and you guys got about 50. But we quite like our one, so appreciate the donation.
Scotland will run out on Sunday with the Doddy tartan on their backs to mark the 5 years since Doddy Weir launched his foundation to find a cure for MND. Ivana Holland, STV News.
That's all your sport tonight, folks. Have a very good weekend. We'll see you again on Monday.
Get your fill of the action. STV Sports, sponsored by Papa John's Pizza.
Sean has the weekend weather.
The outlook for the day is calm and settled. TUI Blue Hotels, sponsor STV Weather.
Well, the air we've got blowing around out there at the moment, originating from North Africa, the Canaries, a little bit of it also coming way across the Atlantic from the likes of the Bahamas and Jamaica, hence why it does feel so unseasonably warm out there, even though we've got those gusty winds. Colder air out in the Atlantic, quite far off just now, but we will start to see some fresher conditions coming in next week. But by fresher, all I mean is the temperatures are going to get closer to where they should be for the time of year. Now, talking of that, well, we have fresher air coming in tonight. Cloud outbreaks of rain moving southwards overnight, so many of us become dry with clear spells, but the weather front lingers in southern areas, so expect around South Lanarkshire, the Borders, Dumfries and Gall. We stay in the warmer air here, 12, 13 degrees, whilst further north we go into fresher air. Temperatures tonight dropping down to about 8 or 9 degrees, so that's a good few degrees down on last night, but remember the average at this point in November by night should be 5. So even though it will feel cooler tonight, it is still way warmer than it should be. Now, tomorrow morning we've got the cloudy outbreaks of rain across southern parts, drifting northwards, so many of us will have a bit of a damp start to the day, but much better in the afternoon. A lot of drier and brighter weather developing, especially central and southern parts, and we're in that warmer air again. Temperatures 15, locally possibly 16 degrees. Now, Sunday there should be plenty of sunshine around, but it will be quite windy, especially around the Hebrides. Bye-bye.
TUI Blue Hotels, sponsor STV Weather.
And finally, I Am a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is back on our screens, and it seems the arrival of Matt Hancock has got everyone talking.
Yes, the former health secretary who lost his job when he was caught breaking COVID rules has been mingling with creepy crawlies, crocodiles and snakes, but he's received a mixed reception both inside the camp and out. So will he be king of the jungle or rejected by the voting public? Polly Bartlett sent us this report from Scotland's very own tropical paradise.
You only get one chance to make a first impression. And Matt Hancock's jungle journey got off to a shaky start.
Well, hello.
Oh,
hello, mate.
When he was finally settled in the camp, it came as no surprise that he was selected for last night's Bush Tucker trial.
I can't believe you're that popular.
His arrival in the jungle, however, has caused a stir.
Are you okay? Duck's what you say. Duck's the question.
The show is the talk of the town at Amazonia in Motherwell, where more and more families are flocking to visit the creepy crawlies.
It's scandalous, I would maybe say, because the press on him, and just I don't think it was the right time for him to enter.
Not where they're still sitting, I don't think it's fair, because they've got an important job that they get paid with for, they get voted in for. If he was retired, fair enough, but it seems he just wants to be a celebrity at the moment.
I thought he was going to get it tight when he went in, but I'm glad that two of them spoke their mind to him, so that kind of cleared the air a wee bit, but I think there'll be more to come.
With the threat of spiders and cockroaches looming large, it's these voters the politician will have to win over.
I would vote for him. I would vote for him. I would vote for him. I think it's payback.
Not really a massive fan of him, so do what you want, to be fair.
Yeah, equally not a huge fan, but in my opinion, all of Westminster could have been thrown in there and left alone, to be honest.
The show is on for another few weeks, so there's still plenty of time for Matt Hancock to try and win over the voting public. But One day in the jungle is enough for me. I'm a new supporter. Get me out of here!
Rather Polly than me. But it's time for us to get out of here now, isn't it, John?
Thank goodness for that. From all of us here, have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.